It's astounding to see a purportedly peaceful person engage in threats of assault. It's even more stunning to see said person act as if doing so is peaceful and is actually for your own good. But that's precisely what Virginia State Health Commissioner Dr. Norman Oliver is doing. He just told the world that when the time comes, he'll mandate state residents to get injected with a so-called COVID-19 vaccine. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV, and here's the story. According to Jackie DeFusco and Emma North of WRIC ABC 8.
Virginia's health commissioner, who says he plans to mandate a coronavirus vaccine when it's made available to the public.
He also told WRIC,
it's killing people now. We don't have a treatment for it. And if we develop a vaccine that can prevent it from spreading in the community, we will save hundreds and hundreds of lives.
So, on a practical level, one might tell this health commissioner that even if one believes the government inflated figures, the fatality rate of COVID-19 is comparable to that of the seasonal flu. And then one might ask Dr. Oliver if he's prepared to mandate flu vaccines every year that he occupies the tax-eating, coercive office from which he issues his authoritarian plans. After all, it will save hundreds and hundreds of lives. Unless those lives actually wanted to live free and stood up for their rights. Because if that's the case, Dr. Oliver's mandate will see the armed force of the state go after people, sucking up more of their money and threatening the very lives that the good doctor claims he's protecting with his threats. Isn't it great to see how government actually works? Then, of course, there's the not-so-great track record of some previous vaccines. For example, in the 1970s, the federal government, including President Gerald Ford, unnecessarily frightened millions of people to get the swine flu vaccine. The result was that hundreds and hundreds of people fell ill with Guillain-Barré, a debilitating neurological disorder that was traced back to the vaccine. And, well, the swine flu? It was nowhere near as deadly as predicted. Then, of course, there's the 1950s, which saw the polio vaccine cause polio in at least 250 people nationwide, that being more than would have gotten the disease naturally. And just last year, a mutation in an oral polio vaccine delivered to children in Africa caused, yeah, you got it, polio in larger numbers than the natural instances of the disease would have actually cropped up in the continental population of Africa. And of course, there's the law. Dr. Oliver claims to have the backing of a Virginia statute allowing the government to mandate a vaccine in a public health emergency. Of course, that statute allows for a medical exemption from the jab, and Virginia politicians are considering an expansion of the exemption to include religious reasons. The Virginia General Assembly is considering a bill during an ongoing special session that would allow people with religious opposition to opt out of the requirement. The bill needs to clear a committee in the House of Delegates before the full chamber could vote on it. Now, DeFusco and North note that Oliver opposes the idea of a religious exemption.
Commissioner of Health Dr. Norman Oliver says he strongly opposes a bill that would allow people with a religious opposition to opt out of an otherwise required COVID-19 vaccine.
Which means that if he has his way, people who know that abortion is murder of a human being would also be required to accept the vaccine that might be derived from a line created via aborted fetuses. And Oliver's claim to be able to force vaccination is blatantly unconstitutional. The assumption of power to find out if people are actually vaccinated breaches the Fourth Amendment prohibition against unwarranted search and seizure. The physical attack of the state-mandated vaccination itself runs contrary to the 8th Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Since there has been no trial to cite a citizen for a wrong, there can be no punishment. Now, philosophers since the Enlightenment have understood that human beings have a property ownership in themselves, so the government commandeering a human body to force something into it is clearly a taking, which the 5th Amendment prohibits in part and which the 13th Amendment prohibits completely. And as I wrote for MRC-TV in June, if anyone like Oliver argues that the state has a so-called public health police power, the person is way off base constitutionally, logically, and morally. Often, federal-level politicians and some on the state level claim that there is an implied public health police power hiding in the General Welfare Clause of the U.S. Constitution. But that clause doesn't spell out any enumerated power. The Constitution specifies all the branches of the U.S. government, all of the enumerated powers, and the amendments are clear. And it lays out how the founders intended these goals to be achieved. By setting up the goal of promoting the general welfare, they meant prosperity through voluntary market exchange, not redistribution of wealth or mandates of vaccinations, since that makes all residents potential targets for government aggression and runs counter to the goal of ensuring liberty, justice, and the so-called rationale for the state itself, property and liberty protection against attacks by other people. Yet these potential assaulters continue to make threats, and some cite the insane 1905 Supreme Court decision in a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts, a case that saw the court invent their public health police power for states that actually does not exist. And it's a case that soon saw politicians in Indiana pass a law allowing for the forced sterilization of people that the state deemed feeble-minded. And subsequent to that, it saw 30,000 people sterilized in 29 states between 1907 and 1939. The practice of U.S. politicians and bureaucrats claiming a, quote, public health police power to control citizens became so widespread that Adolf Hitler actually took notice, writing this: "There is today one state in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of citizenship are noticeable. Of course, it is not our modeled German Republic, but the United States." All that thanks to one group of people misreading the Constitution and others claiming power. And even if there were some power in the U.S. Constitution claiming that politicians could forcibly inject people, no such moral authority ever could be claimed. But of course, the authoritarians will use any justification, any rationale to claim more control over us and our progeny. And they will not be without supporters. As Derek Brose writes for The Last American Vagabond, a recent study looks at what is called parasite stress and how people under the threat of disease pathogens tend to increase their preference for authoritarian states. The researchers found that society tends to promote a collectivist worldview favoring obedience and conformity from the population in response to parasites, disease pathogens. The battle lines are very clear, as are the decisions each of us have to make. Either we fall prey to the statist authoritarian mindset of Dr. Oliver and others like him, or we stand for freedom. If someone wants to get a vaccine injection, him or herself, he or she is free to do so. But people are not free to force others to get the jab. And that is even more important to remember when it comes to the force of government. Thanks so much for being part of this conversation, everybody. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, hit like and make sure you're subscribed. Please share these videos with friends, especially about this subject, because as you know, social media tends to try to crush any sort of dissent or conversation or debate about this in any way whatsoever. And it's extremely important that we get the message out to people. And remember, if you want to find out what the whole team is doing, go to mrctv.org. That's mrctv.org. Please share the articles that people are writing. And if you want some great items, go to mrc-store. We'll see you on YouTube in the comments section. We'll see you in the Facebook group, and we'll see you on Instagram. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.